They well, Cenk commented about how he used to be a Republican, and I thought to myself that it would be valuable to my audience for them to know where I'm coming from, what's my political background. When you're contrasting me and where my point of view and my perspectives, why they are the way they are, I think it's important to know my political background. Again, in contrast to a lot of the other people that you hear online, whether it's right wing media or left wing media. So, my political background was so perhaps I don't know when Cenk was a Republican, but perhaps when he was a Republican or shortly before that, when I was younger, when I first started, as a young adult becoming aware of politics, um, I quickly recognized from because I did used to kind of watch the news. I think because my parents were watching the news, so I grew up as a kid, seeing the news. I wasn't really watching it. It was just on the TV, and I would hear and pay attention. So my perspective as a kid was just this is all nonsense, right? Every day they're talking about somebody got shot and da da da. So even at a very young age, I recognized that it was sort of being sensationalized, right? I recognized at a very young age, me late teens, that news media is basically just trash. It's just sensationalizing everything. Everything's this, that. Somebody died, some shooting here, there's some robbery here. I mean, sure, crimes are happening all the time, but the way they presented it just didn't seem to match reality. And this is coming from someone who went to school where there was a lot of violence. I'm talking about students attacking teachers, students attacking police officers. We had our version of sort of gang warfare. I grew up in the Caribbean, so it was really, we call it posses, but it was kind of the same kind of thing. Our gangs was more about your neighborhood. So if you were in one neighborhood, then you were with your neighborhood, people from other neighborhoods. There were friendly neighborhoods and neighborhoods that aren't friendly, and that's how it was. But a lot of violence, Um, and then as a young adult, I used to live in a very bad area in the Boston area, a lot of crime. I was in New York City, again, in a very bad area. So that's my perspective. So even with that being said, 'cause it's not like I'm coming from some sheltered lifestyle. I saw, I was in the realm where you would potentially see the worst of us, right? So if I'm in these bad areas, right, and even living in the bad areas, I see a different thing in terms of reality versus what I see on the news media. That just told me that the news media is just it's a joke, right? So I didn't care whether it was ABC, CBS, Fox News, whatever. It didn't know. I just looked at it all as it's nonsense. So then I started watching less and less of the news because I just felt like, how is this helping me? I'd rather focus on my career and focus on my goals in life than waste my time watching all this negativity all the time. So that was my perspective on news as a very young age. Politically speaking, I would say all the way up to my young 30s, I was a political dissident, right? So I don't have a liberal background, a conservative background. Now, if you want to be completely accurate, then technically my family would have been classified as conservative, but that word was never used. And they were conservative from the perspective of their values as opposed to being part of a cult, which is what we have in this country with the MAGA movement. Um, so they were conservative because they were very religious. They were very old school. They were very about family values and this kind of stuff, and very much against gays and violent TV and violent music. I mean, this very very religious people, right? And that's the source of the conservatism. The conservatism of my parents really was um, really based on religion. Ultimately, religion, not politics. I never knew what my father's political party was. I never heard him talk about politics. I never heard him talk about um, different parties or the word conservative or liberal. None of that stuff was really discussed in my home. So since it wasn't discussed, and when I was a young adult, I was just rejecting all this as nonsense. It's all a circus. It's all just whatever. So as a young adult, I am not hanging around with highly partisan or political people, or at least if I am, they're not really talking about this stuff around me, so I'm not aware of it. So I'm talking about everything else but politics, right? I'm talking about things that I have interest in and whatever. So whether it's technology or it's extreme sports, which I was very much big into, that's what I'm talking about. That's what the people around me are talking about. So I got to be a young 30s guy, not knowing what the word conservative meant, not knowing what the word liberal meant, not knowing the difference between the Democrats or Republicans. I was aware that there were two parties, but from my, you know, first 30 years of my life, I regarded them ironically. A lot of people like to talk about the talking point of a uniparty and all this kind of stuff, the duopoly. That was my perception from the early 90s to the early 2000s. So well before any of these people even got involved in politics or before it was a talking point, before social media, I already has established that both parties seem to be the same. That was just me as an outsider who's not in some tribe, just observing from the outside, I'm doing my own analysis. This is me, again, late 90s, early 2000s. I'm just like, these two parties, they're the same. They're corrupt. They're frauds. This is nonsense. So I on my own came to the conclusion that the news media was dishonest and an absolute joke, and our politics on our two political parties were a joke. So again, I got up to early 30s without even knowing what the two parties were, what liberals were, what conservative meant. I didn't know any of this stuff, right? My understanding was just I knew as much as I felt was important, and that is that we had our government was dysfunctional, our politics was dysfunctional, and the news media was dysfunctional. That is as much as I knew and understood, right? So that is where I came from. So I'm not a lot of people you watch in left wing media. They're former like Bernie Bros or like Cenk used to be a Republican or whatever. I rejected all of that, right? I have never been a registered Democrat. I've never been a registered Republican, and I have never been sold on any American politician. Bernie Sanders came the closest. I was I was curious about him. Something was different about him. I was curious about him, but he never fully sold me. So, in contrast, when you're watching other political channels, that is one of the reasons why you're going to see a lot of the differences, right? A lot of these people were raised in political families, so they got indoctrinated into left wing ideologies or right wing ideologies. Or if it didn't come from their family, it came from their social circles afterwards. Some of them started watching YouTube videos or stuff online and got indoctrinated into a left wing or right wing ideology. And it is from this that their views are based, right? Some of them also had a political awakening, and at that point, they got seduced by people like Barack Obama or Bernie Sanders or whoever it may be, Reagan, Bush, whoever it was. That never happened to me, right? I was never part of any of these tribes. I was never like a Bernie guy or a Obama guy. I rejected it all. I saw it all as a circus from the early 90s to the early 2000s. That is my background. I come from a very apolitical background, right? I am what Donald Trump pretends to be. I am the legit outsider, right? This is the character that Trump plays on TV. I'm the real deal, right? While Trump was engaged in politics, engaged with these politicians, engaged with the swamp, paying them off to benefit his companies, and then not want to pretend like he's an outsider when he was very much inside. I was rejecting all of that from the late '90s all the way up to right around 2015, 2016, I was rejecting all of that, right? I was focused on my career, focused on my family, focused on my goals, enjoying life, trying to travel. That was my focus. And whatever I saw piercing through, maybe there's a major incident in the news or whatever. Obviously, I wasn't like living in the bushes, so I could see stuff, you know. But whatever was piercing through, I looked at it as fundamentally broken, right? And unfortunately, one of the one of the problems with that is I was so rejecting and so much of an outsider that I thought that even voting was pointless because I'm like, what's the difference? What differences make? I also thought I felt that my analysis and thought process in terms of our politics and our country and what we should be doing versus what we are doing, I felt that I was so foreign, right? I felt so alienated. Like everyone that was talking about politics, it just seemed like they didn't know what they were talking about. So I ignorantly thought my vote didn't matter because you know my point of view was just so outside of the norm, right? But that's just a fundamental. Again, I wasn't paying attention. I wasn't engaged in it, so I didn't. So obviously some of that's gonna result in some level of ignorance. And I didn't fully understand and take the time to understand how our voting works, right? Not realizing that it didn't matter how much my views might be radical or whatever. Ultimately, it comes down to you're going to have two choices. You got to vote for this person or the other person, right? So you could have the most, unique view of the world of the country, and that's not going to matter, right? Because again, it's not like there would be there's a million choices. No, there's two choices. You got to vote for one candidate or the other candidate, right? So whatever. That's the one. It was one of the big flaws that came from me being a legitimate outsider. But anyway, 2015, 2016, things kind of got really crazy to the point where I'd never seen things so unhinged. So now that made me start to pay attention more, right? Before I was just kind of like, it's all nonsense. It's all just a bunch of, circus, whatever, rejecting everything. Now I'm just kind of like, what is happening in this country? So now my sort of analytical mind got triggered. That's who I am. I, I, I'm always analyzing things. That's just my natural state of being. So that got triggered by what was happening in 2015, 2016. So I'm just like, okay, I don't understand how things have gotten to be so crazy. I know it's always been crazy, but now it seems to be on another level. But why? Right? So then I started digging in. That is when I discovered, what a liberal is, what a conservative is, what a progressive is, who the Democrats were versus the Republican, what are the differences of the two parties. Um, and I started to educate myself on our politics and how things work. But a very interesting thing, which is I think a big part of why my perspective is so unique, is because I was doing an analysis on American politics as a fully grown adult that got to my 30s without being indoctrinated into one ideology or the other, right? So my analysis and view came from kind of a clean slate. Now, obviously not perfectly clean, because if you're living in society, you just can't be completely isolated from the effects of our politics, right? But as clean as can be, right? Because again, you look at everyone else talking about politics online, and most of them don't come from a clean background like I do. They come from an ideologically sort of charged background, either from their parents or from their young adult life and online social media presence, right? So a lot of their points of view, a lot of the ways they're thinking is going to be sort of tainted by that, where I don't have that handicap, right? So I was able to, and also I was a fully mature adult, right? So at that point in my life, I was clear in who I am as a person, what my beliefs are, my feeling of like what's right and what's wrong. Like I was a fully formed adult before I took on, an analysis of like, okay, what's going on with our politics, versus a lot of people get indoctrinated before they have gotten to that level. So you're very, very young, and you still even figuring out yourself, and what the world, what's going on. Like you don't, you're still like, still forming as a human, and your personality, and at that vulnerable time where you have so many gaps in knowledge, it allows you to be easily manipulated and get down into certain rabbit holes. You can't do that to someone who is in their 30s, right? Who has lived that long and already, I'm a mature, again, contrast a 15-year-old or 19-year-old or 22-year-old getting involved in politics and their ability to think clearly and objectively and not be manipulated and sucked down a certain rabbit hole. Compare that to an apolitical person who's 30 years old, 33 years old, right? Completely apolitical, and having them listen to people talk about their ideology. Obviously, I was more empowered to think more clearly, right? You're not going to be able to manipulate me and persuade me with weak arguments at that point in time. Like that, the time to indoctrinate me into an ideology had long passed, right? The only indoctrination I got was into religion, right? And that had an effect to a time, right? I had my awakening where I started to realize a lot of the stuff that I had been taught was not completely accurate, but that was my indoctrination. So just like how a lot of people who talk about politics, they were indoctrinated into their ideology, I was indoctrinated into religion, right? But that was something that I shed later in my life, right? So when you hear me talking about politics, when you recognize a difference in my perspective versus pretty much anyone else that you have online talking about politics, this is one of the reasons why, right? I don't think there's anyone else who's talking about politics as disengaged as I am, that is as engaged in politics as I am, that has this kind of experience, this kind of trajectory where, again, I was not indoctrinated into an ideology before I became politically active, right? And I think another important factor is also you have to factor in my character, right? I'm I'm just not a person who is interested in getting attention. Like I don't even I've rejected social media from the very beginning, right? Everyone's telling, oh, you should do Facebook, and I was like, what's the point? I just was not interested in me posting stuff and then trying to get likes and all. I'm just like, why would I spend? I got so much stuff that I have to do. Why should I want to add another task of like trying to think of interesting things to say and blah blah blah, and then dealing with all the nonsense? I'm just like, why? And over time, I've kind of like tried to do a little something something with social media. I do see the value of staying in contact with family, but a lot of times I'll just like I won't even post anything for months. I don't really have like as far as like a personal social media account. I'm just not into it, right? So that's another thing that contrasts me. Pretty much everyone else that you listen to in politics, I'm pretty sure they have an active social media account, whether it's for their business or it's personal, right? So they're in that culture of the obsession with attention, getting likes and all this kind of stuff. I reject that. I'm not interested in that, right? And also, I am just like my integrity is at a level. No one's perfect, of course, but my integrity is at a level where it's 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 to my expense. Because, for example, I'm doing a live stream right now. I'm not gonna get into my personal business, but I have a serious crisis that I'm dealing with right now. I'm super vulnerable. There's big risks, right? And here I am doing a live stream for no money, right? That I know isn't gonna get a lot of views, not gonna get a lot of engagement. Maybe I get one like or two likes, right? But here I am spending this time that I don't have to talk about these things when I haven't even posted anything on any social media as far as even for like debate me channel, whatever. I haven't posted anything. Look at my Twitter account. I haven't posted anything on Twitter, on personal account or otherwise, in probably months at this point. right? So I don't do this for attention. I don't do this for money. I do this because it's important to me, right? But in contrast, just about everyone else that you listen to, they're in that world, that social media world of getting likes and attention. They're trying to run a business, they're trying to make money, they're focused on trying to get your attention and trying to get your engagement or whatever. That's not my priority, right? So coming from an apolitical background, having a different set of values, right? I refuse to sell my soul and just say stuff that's just for clicks or whatever. I won't do that. I will at my expense take time out of my day that I don't have, right? Doing something that I know, is not a lot of people that want to see it, not a lot of people want to hear it. I'm not getting any money from it, not interested in the attention, right? Rather than me just going with the flow. Let me be a left wing channel. Let me be a right wing channel. Let me go on one team or the other because that's going to get me more engagement, right? And then I could potentially make more money and all. Like that doesn't phase me at all. There's almost no one else that talks about politics who is like that, right? So that's one of the reasons why my content is the way it is. That's one of the reasons why my point of views are the way they are, because I'm just simply coming from a very, very different background and life experience, right? Like in contrast to Mr. Cenk on TYT, a former Republican who now, I guess, is a Democrat, and then he was recently promoting some I forgot somebody in California that was just like totally opposed to progressivism. So he's all over the place, right? And then you see him doing a lot of weird stuff, talking like Trump is Hitler, but then he's keeps saying how funny he is. I mean, think about if Hitler was alive today, and imagine Cenk saying, and Hitler's horrible about the stuff he's saying, but he's so funny. I mean, if Cenk really thinks that Trump is as bad as he says he is, how does he find any of it funny, right? But that's what you get from these other folks who are here for different reasons than I am, right? It's up to you to value whether my reasons and my purpose and the results of my content is a good thing or a bad thing. That's up to you. But I'm just telling you what it is, right? It is what it is. You decide for yourself whether you think it's a good thing or a bad thing, right? So anyway, I thought it was an important video to make just to let you guys know where I'm coming from, right? Who is this guy on here with these opinions talking about what I'm talking about? Like, what is? I mean, it's good to understand the context of me, right? So you're not listening to my ideas and my content in isolation, right? You have the context to why I might think the way I think and why I might have the views that I have. And so you can recognize that, I don't go after the left and the right just to be contrarian. I mean, this is staying true to who I am, who I've been since probably, I don't know, 1996, right? You're watching the same person. I mean, obviously, I'm not the same person literally, but in terms of my view of rejecting ideology, my nonpartisanship, my apolitical nature, this is who I've been since the late 90s, right? I've never been part of a tribe. I've always rejected the tribes. It's not a gimmick. It's not something I'm doing trying to be different. It's who I am as a person. I am, as far as an outsider, I am who Donald Trump pretends to be, right? I am the actual original outsider since 1995 up until 2024. I've always been the outsider, and I don't think that'll ever change. And that's not just me trying to be different. I don't want to be different. Being different is kind of isolating. I'm a social person. I love to socialize and hang out with people. I would much more rather have a position that's popular, right? Because I don't want to be abrasive to other people. You may seem that way with the content, but this is a different. Like, this is me putting out content. It's not me how I'm engaging with people in real life. But still, I would much rather be saying things that people love to hear, and people like, oh, that's great. Da, da, da. Like, I'm human, right? And just because I have this unique perspective doesn't change who I am in terms of I'm a human being, right? And we're tribal by nature, and we like to fit in, right? Just because I don't let that control me, right? That desire to fit in or whatever. Just because I choose to sort of not let that control me, doesn't mean that it's not part of who I am as a person, right? I do appreciate those things. I just don't appreciate them nearly as much as many others that you'd see online talking about these types of things, right? There are other things that I'm more concerned about that takes priority, and this other stuff, the human nature to want to fit in and whatever, that stuff is so suppressed by my values and my character, who I am as a person, that they just don't have much impact on me. And this is the result of it. Anyway, this is the Debate Me channel. Debate me in the comment section below. Click on the like button, subscribe, smash that bell. Be well.